I think that raises a really good question, and I'll ask some questions and we'll try to start a little bit of a conversation here. And Tyler, this one is sort of for you. One of the things that struck me about your book was the excellent sourcing. I mean, you go way back to the very beginning of the SPLC and their founding, and looked at their questionable tactics and how they conflate and exaggerate threats. And what struck me was a lot of this behavior was in fact not a secret. There were local press reports. There were even reporting, from leftist publications and left-leaning publications saying, there's a serious problem at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Why do you think, that this information, although available, people just don't recognize it?
Well, I think, we see something very similar with the New York Times, the Washington Post, governments following and echoing the Southern Poverty Law Center, even after this, racism and sexism scandal broke. You have a very big incentive that the liberal groups have to, groups have an incentive to cite the Southern Poverty Law Center as a reliable source, to overlook its own corruption, to overlook the corruption of its founder, and to say, look, this is an effective tool. It's a weapon. It's a political weapon against groups like the Center for Security Policy, groups like the Family Research Council. They like to have this hate group label that they can reference, even though, as you said, Morris Dees' divorce filings, and some of the stuff like he was sleeping with women who were applying to work at the Southern Poverty Law Center. These are huge Me Too no-nos. And you have this culture of sexual availability for Morris Dees at this organization that he co-founded that's really troubling on all sorts of levels. And you have groups, outlets like the New York Times that will just cite the SPLC as this perfect source without acknowledging any of the scandals and the fact that they fired their co-founder, the fact that this is a corrupt organization. We have to get out there and continue to make the case. But it's too politically useful for a lot of people on the left to acknowledge that the SPLC is a corrupt organization, that it has all these money in Cayman Island accounts. A nonprofit civil rights group with funds in the Cayman Islands, millions of dollars. It boggles the mind. And yet they're such a useful organization for the left, for liberal, for Democrats. You had, and I don't know if you guys saw this, a comparison to Pol Pot was made. Alliance Defending Freedom was compared to the Cambodian dictator Pol Pot on the floor of the Senate when Senator Al Franken, the great, majestic Senator Al Franken, came up and was engaging in another attack against conservatives. And it's a very useful label, this hate group accusation. And I think that's the reason. They have every incentive to notice and to echo the SPLC and no incentive to really delve into it. And we have to hold their feet to the fire.
I think that raises another really good point, which I wanted to get into, which is, and General Boykin raised this a little bit, which is that when you have the reliance of major corporations, of the mainstream media, and then of course elements of the government relying on the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's very legitimating for them. So Tyler, I was wondering if you could just walk us through very quickly sort of what the status is of the relationships between the sort of elements. So starting first with the government, where is the law enforcement and government relationship with the SPLC right now? And I've seen articles saying that various elements of the government have cut off relationships with the SPLC, and then you sort of see stuff that suggests maybe they haven't. Do you have a sense of where that is right now on the government side?
So this is one of the times when I can very much say thank God for Donald Trump and thank God for Jeff Sessions. They stood very firmly and said, Jeff Sessions spoke at an Alliance Defending Freedom conference and said, the FBI will not work with discredited organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. And the tragic thing is we have had government law enforcement apparatuses work with the Southern Poverty Law Center for years. In, I think it was 2003, the military was giving out a right-wing extremism pamphlet that talked about SPLC hate groups. And just during the debates, the great Democratic moderate Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. Came out and said he wanted a Southern Poverty Law Center style, terrorist watch list for organizations that were accused of fomenting hate and violence against LGBT people. So this is, right now, the federal government has mostly distanced itself. I'm sure there might be some local and state, and we have seen local and state, in Michigan, Attorney General Dana Nessel went right out and created a hate crimes unit using SPLC data, citing it, saying, look, we have this many hate groups in Michigan. The Southern Poverty Law Center says so. Therefore, we need to monitor hate crimes, and I'm starting this branch of government to do that. Thankfully, there are 2 legal challenges to her new policy.